Herkese merhaba, hoş geldiniz.
Good morning. We would like to welcome you to the second day of hate speech, current debates, and alternative approaches. Just like yesterday, today we are hosting a very distinguished panel. We will be co-moderating this session together with Didar Akar. Let me introduce our speakers. They will have 15 minutes each, and then we will have a Q&A session of 25 minutes. Our first panelist is Dr. Tommaso Caselli from University of Groningen. He's an assistant professor in computational semantics at the Center for Language and Cognition of the Faculty of Arts. He is a very prominent researcher. He has been involved in the organization of several semantic evaluation campaigns, and he actually was awarded in many of these. His research primarily focuses on hate speech, event extraction, framing, misinformation detection, and countering. Our next panelist is Dr. Claudia von Vacano. She is the executive director of the D-Lab, Digital Humanities, and she focuses particularly on transparency and hate speech. She also she is a leader in curriculum development. She designed UC Berkeley's Digital Humanities certificate program, and she is also the lead in online course developer. And we also have Vacano research focusing on algorithmic fairness, transparency, and explainability. Our third panelist is Eser Selen. She is an associate professor of communication design at Özyeğin University. She is also a multimedia artist and designer. So her research is focusing on the intersection of gender, place, culture, women, and performance, as well as queer theory and contemporary art. Our last panelist is Onur Varol, an assistant professor at the Computer Science Department of Sabancı University. Onur has the lab called Viral Lab, which focuses on computational social science, networks, and machine learning. He particularly focuses on disinformation. So we have such a distinguished panel. Let us start with Dr. Tommaso Caselli.
It works, yes, okay. Great. So we got slides this time. Okay, so thanks for the nice word. Thanks for the foundation for the invitation in being here in person, but also for being involved in the entire project that led up to the party tool that we've seen yesterday. Okay, so I want to focus on, I'm gonna bring a different perspective with respect to the one of yesterday. So I started as a linguist, I'm proud of that, but then I moved to become a computational linguist, so it's a bit more nerdy stuff from a certain perspective. And I want to focus on, on pending challenges related to what basically is the detection part of hate speech when it comes to using automatic tools. And this was working before. It doesn't work anymore.
Is it open?
Is it open?
No, is it turn on?
Click on the slide. Yes, it works. Great. So I want to start with this, with a spoiler alert. So I'm sorry, I don't have any definitive, clear-cut solution. There is no anything that I'm going to discuss is is a pending challenge. So it's something that needs still to be solved. There are some nice directions that I think are promising, but if we were coming for solutions, wrong session, I'm sorry. Okay, yesterday there has been a lot of back and forth on connecting hate speech and misinformation. These two phenomena are really strongly linked together. We can go back and find really bad things. I mean, I'm thinking right now to some genocides that are still happening, like the Rohingya genocide people, that started through misinformation and hate speech that led to a massive genocide. Keep going. So these two phenomena are strictly linked, and I think that the way I'm looking at them is using this work by Varol and Derkashan on the notion of information disorder. These are phenomena that, so what is an information disorder? It's a set of phenomena that contributes to polluting the information sphere, and the axes of analysis of information disorder are mostly two. One is the harmfulness of the message, and the other is the truthfulness of the message. Now, this comes from the report that Varol and colleagues have written for the Council of Europe. I don't think that this really brings to the entire, it brings in the full perspective, but you can see that if you look at the only harmfulness side, really hate speech is leaning on that part, and it belongs to what is also a bigger phenomenon of what is called malinformation, so you really want to do harm to someone. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have this misleading content. I mean, I was reading an article a couple of days ago from an Italian newspaper, and I think that the framing of the title was mostly on clicking, so attracting attention for people to click on the article rather than being fully truthful with respect to the finding of a scientific report. But these are really phenomena that fits to each other. And when it comes to reflecting on the definition of hate speech, yesterday we were having a really interesting panel mostly focused on the boundaries of hate, what is hateful or not. I think that definitely there is an agreement on hate speech is something that is harmful, and is harmful towards a target. Okay. The other thing where I strongly convinced there is an agreement is that the hate speech perception is subjective, and there were people yesterday really witnessing that as a first, like, oh, I didn't really perceive that is was hateful. So hate speech is a subjective phenomenon which make it similar to offensive language, which is a different type of, if you want, potential information disorder phenomenon. The problem when it comes to natural language processing, but I think also social science in general, is that we don't have a reference definition. There are multiple definitions of what is hate speech. Yesterday we had some mentioning like United Nations definition, meta definition, and many others. I mean, we can go through 10 years of work on hate speech detection in natural language processing, and I'm pretty sure that we will find at least 20 different definitions of what is hate. And there is starting, so I think that some distinctions that are really interesting to explore is what Asimakopoulos and colleagues in 2017 distinguished between hard hate speech and soft hate speech. So hard is basically like, okay, it's extremely explicit, it's really easy to detect, but also it has legal consequences. So it is a particularly an interesting boundary box where to put some definition of hate speech. But the most challenging part is defining what is a soft hate speech, which can also be implicit. It can be a narrative which promotes discrimination against anyone in a way. The thing that I have seen also when it comes to the definition is that there are risks of creating just list of attributes of targets, and there will always be someone that is left out. So the question is like, is hate speech against politicians hate speech? So I mean, no one usually mentioned these like politicians. Political orientation is different. Okay, so what happens when we look at natural language processing? Well, since there is this nice variation of way of defining hate speech, it becomes extremely difficult to reuse data sets. So everybody is creating their own data sets, and it's impossible to say, I'm going to take it and compare with something else. I'm going to train on these data sets and see how portable is my tool. So there is actually really poor portability of tools in natural language processing. And the other thing that actually I'm really happy that this is happening in natural language processing, there is a shift towards really specific hate speech data sets. So we need to have specific languages. Okay, so we can't train on English and try to detect sexism in Italian, because there's a lot of cultural aspects of hate that do not belong to the two cultures. And we need specific targets. The field of natural language processing, we started working on hate speech like, oh, we have a generic data sets on hate speech. And then we immediately realized that, well, if you target the LGBTQ community, you're going to use a series of hateful terms, which is really different from if you target if you go against racist messages. Okay, so these are lessons that we have learned. And if you start reflecting on the data sets, well, there is a problem in collection. Hate speech is a sparse phenomena. Which platform are we taking into consideration? Where do we get our data? There are issues related to the distribution of the data when it comes to privacy. So preservation of even of the perpetrator of hate. So you don't want to dox people out in the public and says, okay, you're hateful. There is a huge problem when it comes to the terms of use related to platforms. Okay, so plus we have data annotation. I think that Claudia, you will say a lot more than what I'm gonna say about that. So reflect on an impact on natural language processing. Okay, we have learned that random sampling doesn't work, but we need to implement diverse strategies. So keywords is a good way. I think that is more promising. So things that I've been working on for Dutch is using sort of cross-platform keywords. So you look for keywords in one platform, and then you look for messages using these keywords in another platform. There is the example by the EDOS dataset that was part of targeting on the sexism in English. And what they were using was looking in community sample from Reddit plus a series of combination of ensemble methods. So it's a semi-automatic way, and it is a really rich dataset and diverse. Also because I think is the only one that, so far, the one that I know, that is really combining different sources from media platforms. So this one is of Twitter plus Reddit. So it also provides different extent of the length of the message in which the hate can be realized. Data distribution, there is an issue which goes on the data shrinking. If you use Twitter, according to the terms of use of Twitter, you can only release the tweet ID. But since I am the owner of my own messages, if I delete a message, or if my account gets deleted, everything disappears. So basically, you need to preserve the data set size because we work in an empirical field. So I need to be able to replicate your results. So if you use 100 messages, I want to reuse the same 100 messages. Solutions that I have been working, it took me 1 year with my amazing colleagues at the Digital Competence Center of the University of Groningen, is we need to enable data sharing agreements. So you want to use this data for research? Great. You want to make money out of that? Well, let's discuss that. But if this is something that it's needed, it's really needed. We need to anonymize the data, and I think that the Martian example of yesterday was amazing, so I'm just using placeholder, but Martian is really cool. And one solution that popped out from a colleague, so Caselli and colleagues, what they have been working on is, okay, why don't we rewrite the message using generative AI? So we have the hateful message, we preserve the content, but we change the text. So everything that is like, oh, but you can't really reuse this data set because I own the message, well, it's different, so it's a paraphrase, and it's still actually preserving the same level. So this, I think, is a really cool direction to explore. When it comes to annotation, I'm gonna cover this, but I think that some is overlapping. So I think that it's important to make it explicit, document, even really write. How do you annotate the data? Are you following a prescriptive paradigm, or are you following a descriptive guideline? So are you really telling the annotator, this is my definition, these are my rules, please don't overinterpret? Or are you really wanting to explore, like, okay, what do you feel like? Or how do you perceive this message? There must be multiple layers. I think that PARI is really going in that direction. It's an amazing tool, but I think that there is more. Like, you want to distinguish whether, okay, do we have a target? Do we don't have a target? Is this the message explicit? Is it implicit? So the more you make the data set rich, it's also better also to define the specific phenomenon that you're trying to model. Sociodemographic of annotators, this has been discussed yesterday. I think that this is extremely important. I think that there are multiple ways in which this can be documented. In my work, I try to do this following the proposal by Bender, Emily Bender. I forgot now, it's data. I forgot the specific the specific name. And I also strongly believe that when it comes to this kind of phenomenon, we need to use parallel annotations. Disagreement is good. It tells us more than agreement. And yes, is an issue. We need to provide context. Context of occurrence of a message is extremely important in order to determine whether it is hateful or not. I mean, a smiley emoji as a reaction to an incitement for violence is definitely hateful. Without that, without knowing to what is reacting that, it can just be a neutral message. But it's extremely difficult to provide context. So the thread of the conversation is not easy to find. Okay, couple of reflection on tools, and I'm going to close this. I think that for tools, extremely important is tools must generalize. They must go beyond data sets. What we do right now, I'm one of those that I'm telling this really like blatantly, is like we don't generalize on the phenomenon, we create data set, tools that are really good at modeling data set, okay? So if we go beyond the data set, out of distribution, things go really bad. We need tools that are robust across time, and this is a pretty big issue. And we need to provide an explanation. Why is your message hateful? Okay, so I think that what we need is specialized models. I've been working on HateBear. This is like my baby project in a way. I'm really, is a dear work. I love this project, but I mean, there are lots of limitations on that. It's a starting point, but we need to work on specialized model. We need to create more and more benchmarks which are on out of distribution. So functional benchmarking is great. We also need new annotated data. So every couple of years, you may create just a test set and see, okay, how good is your model at doing that? And definitely, we need to introduce some explainability functionalities. One of them, I think, is the classification rationale. So, and I think that Paris is also doing that. It's amazing. So it's like, okay, this is why your message is actually being classified as hateful. We did this for the shared task on against homophobia for Italian messages, and I think that this is a really promising direction. I'm stopping here. These are some references that are not needed. So I think that word is yours, right? So Claudia.
Maybe I can make a few comments
Oh,
before we move on to Claudia's presentation. Thank you for all the informative and brilliant remarks. Right. I think the relationship you set up in the beginning of the talk between starting with the misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, and overlapping hate speech is quite important. I mean, we all agree on the core cases of hate speech, but you also, I think, illustrated with the genocide example, that we cannot simply leave out cases of misinformation because that may have the capability to lead unfortunate violent cases. So I think that expansion of the coverage is important. In the opposite direction as well, you mentioned what I gathered from your comments is that we should also move towards more specialized, more particularized cases to have a better grasp, a firmer grasp on hate speech. So I think that's an important future direction or current direction to follow, rather than trying to cover many target groups or different ways of producing hate speech. Also focusing on specific particular cases will enhance our ability to combat hate speech.
Thank you.
Next.
Great. Thank you so much, Tommaso. That was fantastic, and thanks for helping me with the slides. So I want to start by telling you a story of a little girl who loved her family, and one day she was coming home with her dog, and she saw in the distance her father and some military men arriving at her house. So she ran to her father's side, but it was too late. They had taken him. They had put him in a truck and taken him away, and for 2 years she didn't see him. He was lucky and he was able to seek asylum, but a lot of his colleagues and friends were not so lucky. Some of them were tortured and killed or simply disappeared. As you probably guessed, that girl was me, and that was my father. And the man who baptized me, Luis Espinal, was actually tortured and killed. So I want to say thank you for the foundation and the work that you all have been doing, because it's something that I feel deeply and passionately. And the way I tell the story, I say it that way because I want to convey that this could happen to any of us. And it is happening all over the world. And so the work that we do is really important. It's crucial. Next slide. So I want to start with some foundational pieces, because I feel as though if we are too abstract and too loose in our communication, I actually think that that is what's holding us back and holding back the study of hate speech. And we haven't truly been able to make the kind of progress that we could be making if we were more precise and if we were to truly work in an interdisciplinary manner. But we're not working currently in an interdisciplinary manner. We're working in very siloed ways. So we have social scientists working in one camp. We have natural language processing working in a different camp. We have corporations working in a different camp. And these are very siloed. And so this is, again, one of the reasons why this project has been so powerful and so important, because we're actually coming together and trying to understand each other's work. So from a social scientific perspective, and specifically within the US context, because I agree with Tommaso that what we need is plurality. We need a multiplicity of models, and we need to be able to be very contextually specific, and we can learn from each other. And at the end of this presentation, I will summarize the methodological contributions that we should be building from. But at the same time, we should not confuse that with being able to be portable. There's a big difference between one and the other. And so in the United States context, the notion of protected groups comes from the civil rights movement because of historical inequalities and discrimination. And in order to try to rectify that discrimination, a series of cases were heard and won for equal housing, equal access to labor, equal education. And so these groups were created with the addition of the veteran group as well. But each of these groups was created because of historical issues and to ensure equal treatment and access moving forward. So the take-home message here is that there is a directionality of hate speech. And too frequently, we have this conversation about hate speech without understanding directionality of oppression. And so that's the piece that is transferable and that needs to be in the conversation every time we talk about hate speech. Next slide. So what the Measuring Hate Speech project did was to theorize qualitative levels of hate speech through counter-speech spectrum. And so at the bottom, we theorized that counter-speech was a type of speech that was a response to hate speech that sought to undermine its impact and standing. It sought to educate and to inform. We further theorized that supportive speech was respectful, prideful, that it demonstrated solidarity and support for a protected group. We further acknowledged that there was a lot of neutral speech that was simply descriptive and non-harmful and referenced the specific identity groups. Next, we saw that there was biased speech, an inclination or a preference against a protected identity group, including prejudice, and hostility, unfriendliness, or opposition to a protected identity group, such as through slurs, profanity, or insults, but importantly, not identified because of those slurs, because we've talked about how slurs and just one single word is not going to get us there. Those are going to change, they're going to be masked, and so it needs to be contextually understood. Furthermore, dehumanization. We observed the depriving a protected group of human-like qualities, such as a comparison to an animal or an insect or a disease. At that point, it escalates. It's a cut point where there's threats or support for physical force or emotional abuse to hurt or kill a member of a protected identity group. So this is a very important cut point, right? This is a very an essential thing for us to be aware of, because if we're inciting violence, whether it's psychological or physical, then we need to take special note of that. And finally, genocidal, a support for or intention of systematically killing all or a large number of protected identity groups. So next, through our social scientific methodology, we created an interval variable. We constructed items that corresponded to different components that could help us identify these different elements. So many of the ones that I already discussed, we developed items or questions with Likert scales, but also we included sentiment. We also included simply asking the annotator, is this hate speech, is it not, is it neutral, as a test. And then we also wanted to know, is this speech attacking or defending? Because that would allow us to understand if it was counter speech or not. And so each observation includes 10 ordinal labels. And we tested these items for their validity and reliability. And here you see, and I apologize if this is upsetting, you see the levels on one side, an example of text, a reference set in the middle, and then you have a composite score for the hate speech. So this is the composite score that actually is combining statistically the response for the survey that we developed as part of the annotation process. And so we can examine and understand systematically the way that this corpus has been labeled. And furthermore, you can go ahead and click through the whole thing. So furthermore, this is exactly what Tommaso was talking about, right? This is our beautiful, we developed a model. And so not only are we saying, yes, this is hate speech, no, it's not, we're making it transparent, explainable. And so our beautiful model is, which we assert is possibly the most sophisticated model that not only detects hate speech, but also can measure hate speech, and also it's been cited in approximately 100 different studies. So we're gaining momentum here. And so we could say, I estimate that this comment is about 2.5 on the hate speech scale, which means it's extremely hateful. But I can explain my reasoning is that this comment appears to have strongly negative sentiment at 75% certainty. It likely threatens violence at 85% certainty. It includes an identity group that is a vulnerable population, almost certainly at 99%, and is likely humiliating to that target group at 92%. So you could see how that precision that is drawing from social science, the computational social science precision, where we are actually working in an interdisciplinary manner, we are able to advance the study of hate speech in a way that, frankly, has been stalled. So this is our network of annotators or raters. So we had 10,000 annotators and 50,000 segments of hate speech that we oversampled on hate, because we know that a hate speech is less than 1%. Next slide. So, yeah, that's fine. So here you'll see how a right map works through item response theory, and this is where I +1 Tommaso on the nerdiness level. And I think this is honestly what is the barrier, because it gets really nerdy real fast. But here you see the comments and the full spectrum of comments. And then in the middle, you see how the items helped us identify which of the items helped us identify the scores. And then you see where the annotators fall in the spectrum. And this is actually a beautiful right map. Chris Kennedy, 2020, did a fantastic job of really following Mark Wilson's constructing measures approach. And this is exactly what you want to see. You want to have a full spectrum of comments. You want to have an instrument that enables you to annotate it appropriately. And then you need all the demographic and background information of the annotators, but most importantly, to understand how sensitive they are to hate speech, to the hate speech that they are reading. We could go to the next slide. So this is our corpora that you can go to hatespeech.berkeley.edu and read our publications. You can go to GitHub and get our data or get our model. You can go to Hugging Face. Everything that we do is completely open source. And we really believe, we know that there's a lot of danger in that, but we also believe that we need to move forward jointly. And open science and open source. So we really encourage anybody to please use the data set, use our methodology, and use our model. And next slide. So this gives you a sense of how we labeled this data set. We took data from YouTube, what now is X, and Reddit, 50,000 comments in total. And then we created this instrument that is our measuring hate speech instrument through Qualtrics. And we used Amazon Turk to provide the different reference comments of hate speech or not hate speech to the annotators, 10,000 annotators total. And then we were able to develop our data set, and eventually that's how we trained our machine learning model. Next slide. So now I'm going to switch over to my dear colleague Pratik Sachdeva, who's been doing a fantastic work, who joined the team after Chris Kennedy left. And so what Sachdeva et al. What we did was to then start to think, okay, what else could we do with this incredibly rich data set that gives us information not only about the hate speech comments, but actually about the annotator's identity and how their identity relates to their interpretation of the comments. And what we found is that it absolutely, not surprisingly, makes a huge difference who the annotator is in order to detect the nuance hate speech that is targeting that community group. So Black annotators were more likely to label anti-Black speech as hate speech. Next slide. So I just want to say that in order for us to build robust machine learning models, we need robustness and transparency. We need data representation. We need to consider the annotation the annotator's demographics. Bias is not something that we just want to simply erase. we actually want to understand what the bias is so that then we can account for the biases. And we want models that are explainable. We don't accept this black box, this lie of a black box. These models can be explainable. And so, next slide. You can move to the end. So in terms of a set of recommendations and reflections from the time we've spent together so far, I think that, we may have different contexts, and our specific protected and vulnerable groups might be very different, but the directionality is very important, and who those groups are, we need to define, and who the annotators are need to reflect that diversity. Secondly, we may have different data sets, but we need to agree that that annotator diversity is essential. A bit redundant from the first point. And number three, we may also use different languages, and language is geographically and temporally contextual. But we should agree that we need to have data that provides rich context for the speech we're trying to identify. Four, we will not be able to build one model that detects all hate speech or measures all hate speech. So here is where plurality of models is healthy and necessary. However, when possible, let's work together because it's extremely expensive and difficult to build these models. And the powers that be have much more resources than foundations or scholars. So let's try to find places of commonality. Again, social science is a powerful set of disciplines that can support us understanding hate speech in a systematic way. Data science alone and computer science alone cannot solve this problem. Finally, as a community of concerned individuals, we need to continue to hold corporations accountable and advance research in a way that can democratize these algorithms. The recent events, and I'm not going to belabor this point because we discussed this yesterday, but the recent events, particularly Meta's new content policies, really risk fueling mass violence and genocide. So now more than ever, we really need to be thoughtful and involved as users and as scholars. Thank you.
All right. Yes.
You wanted me to move it?
No, it's fine.
No, it's okay?
Just fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oops. There is like there. Huh? All right. Just a second. I need to. All right. All right. Okay. So, in this presentation, I will give some insight on my ongoing and self-funded, not lack of trying to get outside sources, funds, but a project entitled For Love's Sake, Beyond Visibility, Supporting LGBTI plus Individuals' Rights in Turkey, and I dubbed it LGBTI plus love. And the project initially focuses on the rising wave of anti-LGBTI plus individuals and gender ideology discourses in the media in its multiplicity. I shared the results of segment I analyze my data, which I will be talking about in segments, and I share the results with anyone who is willing to listen. And before I get to my research process and my research design, I'd like to give a little bit of background, historical context to people who doesn't know how Turkey's the situation of LGBTI plus individuals and as a community. And in Turkey's legal framework presents a paradox. While homosexuality, transgender identity, or being trans is not criminalized, the state, however, systematically erases LGBTI plus identities from its policies. This has led to a culture of fear, violence, particularly against trans individuals and sex workers who face extreme discrimination and hate speech. And I'd like to give a little bit of, in brackets, yesterday's discussion was amazing. I learned too much, and I just want to add my 2 cents on the subject as how I look at hate speech, which is, it's not always overt and vocal. It can manifest through various means, including memes, subtle forms of expression, such as microaggressions. And it is important to consider the intersectionality of factors like ethnicity, just like Claudia talked about, like race, religion, language, on top of gender and sexuality, as well as sexual orientation when addressing hate speech, as these factors can compound the harm caused by such speech. Different groups may experience hate speech differently, and tailoring responses to specific forms of hate speech is crucial. Therefore, in the project, I usually focuses on the experiences of LGBTI plus community when subjected to hate speech, exploring how members of this community feel when confronted with it, and trying to shed light actually on their perspective and emotional responses, while considering not just the hate speech as a definitive definition, but the juxtaposition, sometimes the interaction or overimposition of discriminatory discourse and dangerous speech and hate speech. I'm really interested in looking at the cusp of these terms and how they fall into the described or defined, let's say, definitions of hate speech, discriminatory discourse, or dangerous discourse, dangerous speech, as Susan Manish presented to us, gave us another vocabulary to be able to discuss it theoretically or otherwise. So the current challenges, I like to give it a little bit of background still. The LGBTI plus citizens in Turkey endure violence and various challenges, including legal efforts to disband LGBTI organizations, lack of investigations into violence against LGBTI citizens, institutional prejudices leading to job loss and social ostracism. And currently, if the proposed or current like ongoing law gets voted in the parliament and passes, not only will LGBTI identities will fully be criminalized, so do heterosexual identities that fall outside of the accepted social norms and moral values of Turkishness based on morality clauses, religious or otherwise. So in the project I try to map and critically analyze multimodal discourses concerning discrimination against the community in Turkey. As a research initiative, I envisioned this project at the intersection of academia, art, and activism, serving a needed platform for understanding and addressing the challenges faced by LGBTI plus citizens in Turkey. I use citizens interchangeably with individuals for a reason. I may or may not be able to talk about it in this presentation. And while my overarching aim is to develop policy recommendations for future generations that foster resilience, equality, and acceptance, I designed the research in 4 stages that you have already been looking at, and with several, sub-objectives to map the implications of these discourses on LGBTI individuals, to critically analyze anti-LGBTI plus and gender ideology discourses in Turkey through a multimodal approach, and to propose actionable strategies to counteract discrimination. Not as I'm going to solve it as everybody solve it, but at least give out a proposal that may or may not help in the future or at present. So the step, I'm going to just talk about a little bit about the stage 3 right now, because I don't have any time to do all of it. But please feel free to just contact me if you want to hear more. I'm always willing to talk about it. And in this stage of this research, I explored the layered landscape of these discourses, the discriminatory discourses, and specifically focus on the narratives that verge on, as I said, hate speech within digital media, primarily Twitter, but not yet X. And I throw in the data some research questions. That involve hate speech and reflect gender ideology to understand the volume and content of these discourses, and how discriminatory these discourses are. I work with mainly with volunteers, and I have 3 other volunteers, academics, and working with me, and which naturally became my co-authors in the upcoming publication. One of them is a law professor, the other is a political science professor, and another data scientist, postdoctoral data scientist. So the data collection has been, it is a data, I'm not going to say big data or anything like that, because I'm not working like that, but I retrieved discriminatory discourses on Twitter from 2002 to 2020 up to 2022, but I'm going to talk about the 18 years period right now. I do not analyze it as a whole. I do analyze it as segments, like in sometimes like convenience sampling, sometimes in relation to some social events like Istanbul Convention's cancellation and so forth and so on. Or, for instance, during the elections and during other sorts of campaigns. So I throw out qualitative analysis, and which is a kind of a thematic analysis of tweets, and apply critical discourse analysis to identify dominant narratives. I do this by creating micro content analysis, which also backs up the quantitative aspect of the analysis, and then apply a mezzo-level discourse analysis to understand the broader social conversation surrounding LGBTI issues and debates, particularly, as I said, in relation to, or like social events like the Istanbul Convention, and the qualitative analysis involves engagement metrics to assess the impact of specific tweets on public discourse, including descriptive statistics, correlation analysis, sentiment analysis, and network analysis. And I do this with the help of my team member, who is a data scientist, who is modeling the codes and the structure and helping me out with the parts that I don't know how. So I am indebted to my team members endlessly. And I did a pilot study, and you can find the pilot studies description and the findings at Hrant Dink's website, because I presented on like December 2020, and at the International Conference of Hate Speech and Discrimination. It's presented like three key themes: the moral panic, gender ideology, and cultural resistance. And then I moved on to the Istanbul Convention, when it is conventions and surrounding discourses regarding Istanbul conventions 3 months prior to the cancellation and 3 months after the cancellation, and all of those discourses within, because I had the data and I can look at several different time frames. And the withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention in 2021 marked a significant regression in LGBTI rights, framing citizens as deviants and a source of moral corruption within societal discourse. So the withdrawal catalyzed an increase in LGBTI plus anti-LGBTI plus sentiments, framing the community's right as a threat to traditional Turkish family values and religious morals. This has intensified hate speech and violence against marginalized communities, not just the LGBTI people, but everyone else who are falling outside the traditional description of gender and gender identity and sexual orientation. Yeah, I'm just wrapping it up. Is that okay? Do I have like 2 minutes, just or less than? All right. Based on, I cannot show you my findings because I don't have time, but again, you can contact me whenever you want through email. And what I found is there appears to be some measure of dissonance in leading LGBTI communities' rights to combat anti-LGBTI discourses and phobia in the current life in Turkey, and especially Turkey's present unstable and violent, let's say volatile, political atmosphere seems to accumulate gender ideology and anti-LGBTI discourses against sexual minorities. And in everyday life, however, it reflects numerous discriminatory discourses, often violent, and the politicization of violence against LGBTI plus community should be reviewed, not just as a means of removing LGBTI subjectivity from the face of the earth, or further subjectify LGBTI citizens from within from within Turkey as a nation and as a society. And there is no doubt an urgent transformative need for a transformative approach to human rights in Turkey by fostering inclusive discourse and countering anti-LGBTI plus narratives. Probably we can pave the way to a possible solution for a more equitable society, and of course further research and researchers like Thomas and Claudia and Onur's, they're not just working on LGBTI individuals, but as a critical understanding of how hate speech wounds and harms individuals who share who has different identity measures, and presently the digital media is quite prevalent and quite effective in shaping public perceptions and policies regarding minorities, LGBTI plus or otherwise. So this is all I want to say today.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
So much. Yeah, sure.
Thank you for the last two presentations. I have a few comments regarding both, actually in both studies. We have seen a different perspective. Yesterday and at the beginning of the session, we talked about the detection of hate speech. Now, with the last two presentations, we are talking about the perception of the hate speech. Annotators may not be the targets, but I mean the findings already show that some of them belong to the target groups and they react accordingly. And with Selen Hoca's research, we also see how the target group itself and their perception, their reaction should be studied as well. So that's, I think, both are great contributions towards the ultimate goal. Thank you for that.
Okay, so next talk is from Dr. Onur.
Tommaso, do you mind opening the slides that you are in? So the PDF files. I think the browser edge browser on the second row left. Yes, second row left.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't see that, sorry.
So hello, I just want to talk about like some of the research that we have been doing in the field. So as a network scientist, I really value the content about the hate speech, but there are some missing aspects that I think will foster the detection of hate speech even further when we take a look at the content and when we consider the algorithmic amplification. So it's going to be a little bit more clear when I start to define them. So there are a few significant challenges in the hate speech detection. One of them, of course, the content, because the language, especially the problematic content. We have the low resource languages like Turkish, Armenian. So developing models for such languages is become quite a challenge because the prevalence of the textual data models availability will become an issue. Some of the multilingual models may only capture maybe 5% of their entire corpus coming from such data sets, and the performance is actually lacking for those languages when we want to study with them. And also there are lack of research interest or funding for those type of research, or many times the prevalence of the content in English fosters the research on those domains, but then it doesn't make the problem less important if the content is less prevalent. And another important issue is the context, because sometimes just by looking at the simple textual information from a tweet, from a social media message, may not be relevant. So there are issues in the social network. People are exchanging those messages, and depending on who is sending those messages and who is receiving it, may totally change the interpretation. Two friends talking with each other using slang words might be totally different than someone on purpose attacking another individual on social media. So we need to be able to look at the network context as well in order to study it. And the third issue, which is quite relevant to my ongoing research, so I have been studying social bots, how social bots have been used to amplify misinformation, is also relevant for the hate speech, because utilizing algorithmic automation, one can target certain individual group and create thousands of messages automatically, locating certain individual accounts, strategic locations on the network to become more visible or more effective. So those type of automation is also hard to fight against, because certain content shared by individual humans maybe can be reported by the groups, or platforms can catch them and suspend these accounts or delete their content when they identify them. But if someone doing it in a more systematic, amplified way, it becomes a much more bigger an issue, because then these content become much more visible. People cannot be able to fight against it. So then there are more responsibilities for the platform. So in terms of like low resource languages and specifically studying social media, we developed a model called Turkish Bird Tweet. So this is a Turkish social media specific large language model that we trained from scratch. So we have 10 years of historical Turkish tweets. We account about like 900 million tweets from scratch to build our own language model. And we utilize this model with specific language-specific tokenizers, the platform-specific tokenizers to extract entities, URLs, hashtags, to be able to develop these models, become one of the standards for social media studies. And we went through a really systematic, detailed analysis to understand how much our model can generalize and how it performs on different tasks, like sentiment detection and hate speech detection, thanks to Grounding Foundation's projects, where they provide us these annotated labeled data. So few lessons that we learn is, we know some of the fine-tuning approaches are quite effective than standard fine-tuning. They can outperform the ChatGPT based models when they try to utilize the available models for those tasks, because one finding that we have is these LLMs try to be more conservative when calling something a hate speech. So it is becoming an issue. They try to not to label something as hate speech, but they try to be more careful when they are labeling such instances. So they become less useful for practical research. And also another thing is scalability, and also how much cost it will introduce. So in the zero-shot learning setting, we see they are quite limited in terms of the performances. We also compare other models that are available on Turkish, where there are various different LLMs in Turkish. Most of them are fine-tuned existing LLM models like Llama, and applied for Turkish language. So Turkish Bird Tweet is also distinguished since it starts from the scratch and built on top of like about 900 million Turkish tweets that we have. And also another thing is like the cost. So we can also fine-tune models. ChatGPT or Gemini, these systems come with a zero-shot setting, so then we can utilize what model learn about hate speech from its own, let's say, training data. But we can also provide our own training data for these data sets. So then the performance started to become similar in terms of detection of hate speech, since we kind of like instruct those models to recognize hate speech versus non-hate speech content, but their generalizability is still not as good as the models that we compare, especially when we were looking for the ChatGPT models fine-tuned. So this is also another limitation. Fine-tuning such models is also costly. Paying for every inference is also another cost. So developing each model from scratch has definitely their own benefits. So we apply those models to a challenge organized by Berrin Hoca and others from the project. So we also have few learning from that project. So our model became the third best model. So we were a little bit happy. The models that we have in the held out set is actually even better. So we didn't actually submit our best model to the competition, because in the private set, the performance needs to be better performances than the public one. But the thing is, when we look at the final publication of the competition, we realize the second best model is actually using Turkish word tweet. They just fine-tune it better than we do. They did a good job, better job than ourselves using our own model. And maybe the best message, I mean, we had a lot of fun with my student Ali when we see the results, because it was kind of like nice that seeing our model adapted in the community and research teams, but also people find it useful. And the first model did a really smart idea. So they translated the Arabic corpus. So they actually enriched their data set through the translation. So that was also giving them an additional advantage. But maybe the one thing that when we compare different models, what type of error these models are making is also quite important. Do we labeling non-hate speech content as hate speech more likely? So then these are the false positives, or the other way around. So do we miss lots of hate speech and then calling them non-hate speech? Is the another important issue when we want to deploy or use those models in practice in real settings. So our model also have shown us more balanced distributions in terms of like the different types of errors. And another thing, I think I haven't put it in the slides for this presentation, but we also did misclassification analysis. So we look at what we predict as hate speech, but the data set is telling other way around, or what we call non-hate speech, but the data says as hate speech. So there were also some annotation mistakes that we recognize. So this is also an issue related to human annotation, the challenges, difficulties of human annotations. So then sometimes using a model in a loop type of approach, utilizing the model's performances to re-evaluate some of the instances could be a valuable way to improve the data sets and the models. Also, having such models is quite beneficial, because in our data set we have millions of tweets, and just labeling the data that we have been studying Turkish election and hate speech and sentiment in the 2023 Turkish election, just labeling those tweets through our model costs like $20,000. So we don't want to throw such a money outside. So using our own model is actually faster in terms of inference time, and also pretty much no cost on our sides. And such sentiment model can recognize 29 Ekim, New Year as the positive event. So this is kind of like an external validation for us. And unfortunately, the earthquake happening in February 2023. So those type of events could also be aggregated, recognized from the public level sentiment, which is also a good, let's say, validation of our models. So there are several advantages that I already talked about. As Claudia mentioned, we also really value the open science. We deploy our models to Hugging Face platform with their LoRa fine-tuned models for hate speech and sentiment. So anyone can utilize that model in their own research. So this is one thing that we quite value. And lastly, I wanted to mention a few things that I quite value. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I have been studying social bot detection. And the reason I've been studying social bot detection is their role in understanding misinformation spreading. Because these type of accounts utilize to spread those misinformation. And since 2000, let's say 13, 14, there have been a significant paradigm change. So when I developed botometer model, our target was making this system requiring as little data as possible, being able to make offer an inference at the account level, and we can combine those account level statistics to study how the misinformation spread on a network by looking at each actors. But then what we started to see is some organic behavior that we call human-like behavior versus automated behavior shifted throughout the years. So let's say the boundaries between human and bot accounts become less visible, they become more blurry because of the generative AI use. So now most of my research focused on the coordinated activities. Maybe individuals are posting hateful content, there might be one single instances and their impact can be measured or questioned. But when thousands of accounts posting similar content, targeting some vulnerable groups, offering or introducing a much bigger problem. So how we can identify these goal-oriented, targeted towards certain vulnerable groups is much more important problem for us. Maybe as small ants in that figure that I showed could be our organic human behavior. Humans can coordinate through other platforms. They use 4chan-like platforms to target individuals and go to Twitter or other platforms to post similar content or targeting particular individuals. But the same as for the bots. So we can, people can create really realistic bot behavior, and we may not be able to recognize them as bots or humans, but if we recognize the same behavioral pattern happening 10,000 different accounts pretty much simultaneously if they post at the same time, then this is a coordination pattern for us. So we have one ongoing European Union project, the Chester project, to identify such coordinated activities. So our goal there is recognizing the blueprints of the accounts and how they could kind of like amplify the content towards certain targeted groups. So I think in the hate speech detection, we should also think in terms of the networks and how on these networks, this content can be amplified through automation. Because as single individuals, we may not be able to let's say, fight against such activities by blocking or reporting every individual account one by one. We need more systematic tools developed for the coordinated behavior, and platforms should be able to also catch those activities since they have the most data and the activity records. And Tommaso made a really good point, like the lack of data, deletion of the data. So there is one such law in EU, right to be forgotten law. So because of these laws, and bot accounts can post something and then delete it, post something and delete it, and repeat this 10,000 times a day. And most of the systems or the data collection will not be able to see it. But these 10,000 posts that are not there when we are studying them can make thousands of impressions on individuals. And that become a bigger issue. So platforms have responsibilities on those as well under the legal constraints. So I just want to start with these notes, like the coordination and automation is also an important aspect of the hate speech detection. So thank you very much.